The board meeting had already started when the doors opened. 14 people sat around a mahogany table on the 15th floor of Mercy General Hospital. Administrators, department heads, the chief medical officer, and a hospital board that had not agreed on anything in 3 years except one thing. Nurse Miriam Asant had to go. They had the paperwork ready. They had the language prepared, performance concerns, insubordination, failure to follow triage protocol. They had built a file on her over 6 weeks that said, in the careful language of institutions protecting themselves, "This woman cares too much about the wrong people." What they did not have, what none of them had thought to account for, was the man who walked through those doors. He was not wearing a suit. He was not carrying a briefcase. He was wearing a gray sweater and dark trousers and the quiet, unhurried expression of a man who has nothing left to prove to any room he enters. Dr. Bello, the chief medical officer, looked up from the table. "Sir, this is a closed board meeting. You'll need to." The man sat down at the head of the table, the one empty chair, the one that had been empty for 11 years. He looked at the paperwork in front of them, at the name on the top of the file. And then he looked at Dr. Bello with an expression that was not anger, something quieter than anger, and therefore more dangerous. "I know," he said. "I called the meeting." His name was Walter Crane. He had founded Mercy General Hospital 31 years ago with a personal endowment, a vision, and a belief that medicine should be practiced the same way for every human being who walked through the door, regardless of what they had in their wallet or on their wrist or in their name. For 11 years he had been absent, traveling, grieving, living in the way that very private people live invisibly, by choice, outside the architecture of the institution that still bore his founding principles, even as those principles were being quietly dismantled floor by floor. 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday night in February, he had been brought into Mercy General's emergency department. Frostbitten, unconscious, unidentified, and a nurse named Miriam had been the first person to reach him. "Stay with me," because this story is not really about a billionaire and a nurse. It is about what it costs to treat every human being as though they matter, and what happens, eventually, inevitably, when the right person is watching. Miriam Asant had been a nurse for 9 years. She had trained in Accra, completed her postgraduate certification in London, and arrived at Mercy General in Chicago 6 years ago with the kind of competence that makes senior staff nervous. Not because she was aggressive or ambitious, but because she was simply very, very good, and goodness in a system built around efficiency creates friction. She worked night shifts in the emergency department, by choice. Night shifts were harder, lonelier, less visible, and more honest. The patients who came in at 2 a.m. were not there for convenience. They were there because something had gone wrong and had no other option. Miriam understood those patients in a particular way. She had grown up as someone with no other option. She understood what it felt like to walk into a room and wait to find out whether you would be treated as a problem or a person. She had decided, early in her career, that in her ward the answer would always be a person. This had not made her universally popular. Dr. Bello ran the emergency department the way a man runs a department when he has confused efficiency with medicine. Turnaround times, bed occupancy rates, patient throughput. The language of a factory applied to a place where people arrived bleeding. Miriam did not work slowly. She worked thoroughly. There was a difference, and Bello had never understood it, and the gap between his understanding and her practice had been widening for 3 years into something that had begun to look, from his side of it, like a problem. She had spent 40 minutes with a homeless man last November when Bello said the situation required 10. She had flagged a medication dosage error that embarrassed a senior physician. She had twice refused to discharge patients she believed were not ready, and had been right both times, which somehow made it worse. The file they were building on her was real. The charges in it were accurate in the way that charges are accurate when someone has decided the conclusion first and worked backward to the evidence. She knew the file existed. She did not change how she worked. She could not have told you why, exactly, except that she had not become a nurse to work any other way. It was a Tuesday night in February, 11:47 p.m. The ambulance brought him in without identification. Male, approximately 65, found collapsed in a doorway on Wacker Drive by a security guard who had almost walked past and then didn't. Frostbite on the hands and left ear. Core temperature dangerously low. Unconscious but breathing. He was wearing a gray wool coat over a plain sweater. No wallet. No phone. No jewelry. The coat was expensive, the kind of quality that does not announce itself but is recognizable to anyone who knows what they are looking at. Nobody in the emergency bay at 11:47 was looking at the coat. They were looking at the chart, at the absence of a name on it, at the column where insurance information should have been. Miriam was the first to reach him. She did not look at the chart first. This was the thing about Miriam that Bello had documented as a protocol violation, and that was, in fact, simply the way she worked. She looked at the patient first. She assessed what was in front of her before she assessed what was on paper, because what was on paper was always a summary, and what was in front of her was always the truth. What was in front of her? A man who was cold in the way that people become cold when the cold has had a long time to work. Hands white at the fingertips, the skin waxy and beginning to blister. Left ear the same. Face slack but not absent, even unconscious. There was something in the structure of his face that suggested a person who, when awake, held himself with considerable self-possession. She began warming him. Not because of who he was. She did not know who he was. She began warming him because he was cold and she was a nurse, and that was the job. He regained consciousness at 1:17 a.m. His eyes opened slowly. He looked at the ceiling, then at the IV in his arm, then at Miriam, who was charting beside him and looked up when she heard him shift. "Good morning," she said. "Or good night, depending on your perspective. You're at Mercy General. You came in about 90 minutes ago. How are you feeling?" He looked at her for a moment. Not the disoriented look of a man who does not know where he is. A considered look. The look of someone taking an assessment. "Cold," he said. "You will be for a while," she said. "Your core temperature was very low when you came in. We're warming you carefully. Can you tell me your name?" A pause. "Walter," he said. "Walter, do you have a last name you want to give me?" Another pause, longer. He was looking at her in a way she could not entirely read. "Not tonight," he said. She noted it. She did not push. She had worked enough nights to know that people arrived with reasons for the things they withheld, and that those reasons were usually more important than the information itself. "Okay, Walter," she said. "That's fine. Let's just focus on getting you warm." She pulled the blanket up to his shoulder. He watched her do it. And something in his expression shifted. Something very small and very old, like a door that had been closed for a long time opening just slightly. He stayed for 3 days. The frostbite required monitoring. His temperature needed to stabilize. There were tests, assessments, the ordinary procedures of a body that has been pushed past its comfortable limits and needs time and attention to return. He gave no last name. He refused the social worker twice politely. He made no calls from the hospital phone. He had no visitors. The staff treated him with the range of attention that unidentified patients receive in busy hospitals, which is to say, functional attention. The attention of people doing their jobs adequately for someone who would not be there long and who did not appear to be a problem. Miriam's attention was different. She checked on him at the beginning and end of every shift. She brought him books from the staff room when she noticed he was awake and unstimulated. She told him, on the second night, about the history of the hospital, not because she knew it was relevant, but because he had asked what she was reading and it had come up, the founding story of Mercy General, the man who had built it with the principle that every patient deserved the same care. He listened to this very carefully. "Do you believe that?" he asked. "That the hospital still works that way?" Miriam was quiet for a moment. "I believe it should," she said. "I believe some people here still try to. I believe the gap between what it was built to be and what it has become is something worth fighting about. And are you fighting? She looked at him. Every shift, she said. On the third morning, before she went home, she stopped at his room. He was sitting up, better. The color had returned to his face. His hands, still bandaged at the fingertips, were folded in his lap. You're being discharged today, she told him. Do you have somewhere to go? Yes, he said. Somewhere warm. The corner of his mouth moved. Very warm, he said. She handed him a card. Not her personal card, a resource card, the kind she kept in her pocket for patients who left with uncertain situations. Shelter contacts, community health lines, the numbers of people whose job it was to help people who needed help. In case, she said, you don't have to use it. He took it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Thank you, Miriam, he said. For the care, for the books, for not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. She nodded. She did not ask how he knew her name from her badge, or why the way he said thank you had the weight of something more than a routine discharge. She went home. She slept. She came back the next night and did it all again. She did not think about Walter again until 3 weeks later. When his name appeared at the top of the agenda of a board meeting she had not been invited to attend. The meeting had been called for a Thursday morning at 9. Miriam knew about it the way staff know about things in hospitals, not through official channels, but through the specific rumor network of people who work close to each other in high-pressure conditions and have learned to read the mood of an institution the way sailors read weather. Sandra from administration had told her. Sandra had seen the file. It's thick, Miriam, Sandra said, in the corridor outside the staff room on Wednesday evening, her voice low. Bello has been building it for weeks. The Donaldson patient, the Ray's medication flag, the 2 discharge refusals, they're calling it insubordination. It was insubordination, Miriam said. Those patients weren't ready. Miriam. I know, Miriam said. I know. She had not slept well. Not from fear exactly. She had made peace with the possibility of this outcome long before it arrived. But from the specific sadness of a person who can see something unjust approaching and has chosen not to move out of its way because moving would require becoming someone different. She went to work her shift on Wednesday night. She did her job. She came home Thursday morning, changed, and sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about what she would say if they gave her the opportunity to say anything. She had not decided when her phone rang. It was the hospital, not Bello's office, the main switchboard. Nurse Oath, there is a board meeting this morning at 9. You've been requested to attend. Requested by whom? She asked. A pause. Mr. Voss, the voice said, the founder. Miriam set down her tea. She sat with that for a moment. Then she got up, put on her coat, and went back to the hospital she had just left. She arrived at 9:03. The room was already charged, the specific electrical tension of a space where people have been sitting with something unresolved long enough that the air itself has taken sides. 14 faces turned when she walked in. Bello's expression was the expression of a man whose plan has encountered a variable he did not account for. At the head of the table, in the chair that had been empty for 11 years, Walter. Not the man she had last seen in a hospital gown with bandaged hands. This man was in a gray sweater and dark trousers, the same plain quality she had noted in his coat, his hands folded on the table in front of him, the bandages gone, the skin at the fingertips still slightly marked where the frostbite had been. He looked at her when she walked in. She looked at him. Something passed between them that the rest of the room did not have access to. She sat in the chair indicated, the one they had put at the side, not at the table, the chair for the person being discussed. She sat in it straight-backed and folded her hands and waited. Walter spoke first. I've read the file, he said. All of it. I want to begin by asking Dr. Bello a question. Bello straightened. He had the look of a man who had prepared for a different meeting. Of course, Mr. Voss. The Donaldson patient. Nurse Ose spent 40 minutes with him when your protocol suggested 10. He was subsequently diagnosed with early-stage cardiac arrhythmia that the additional assessment time helped identify. Is that accurate? The protocol. Is it accurate? A pause. Yes. The raise medication flag. She identified a dosage error that, if administered, would have caused serious harm to a 62-year-old patient with a compromised liver. She flagged it. The senior physician was embarrassed. The flag was correct. Bellow's jaw was tight. Yes. The 2 discharge refusals. Both patients were kept an additional night against your recommendation. Both were subsequently found to have complications that required treatment they received because they were still in the hospital. Both are alive and well. He did not make it a question. He let it sit. The room was very quiet. Miriam was looking at the table surface, not because she was ashamed, because she was trying to manage what she was feeling, which was large and complicated and not suited to a board meeting. Walter turned to the board. I was brought into this hospital 3 weeks ago without identification. I was cold. I was unconscious. I had no insurance information visible, no name on a chart, no reason for anyone in a busy emergency department on a Tuesday night to treat me as anything other than a throughput problem. He paused. Nurse Osei treated me like a human being. She did not look at the chart first. She looked at me. She warmed me, monitored me, brought me books, and on the day I was discharged, handed me a card with community resources in case I needed them. She did not know who I was. It made no difference to the quality of her care. He looked at Bello. That is what I built this hospital to do. That is the founding principle of this institution. And you have spent 6 weeks building a file to remove the one person in this department who is still doing it. Bello opened his mouth. Walter raised one hand, one finger, the quietest possible gesture. Bello closed his mouth. Walter turned to Miriam. Nurse Osei, I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Patient Care Standards. You would report directly to the board. Your mandate would be to rebuild the care principles of this hospital from the ground up, beginning with the emergency department. Miriam looked at him for a long time. I'm a nurse, she said. I'm good at being a nurse. I'm not sure I want to stop being one. He almost smiled. The role doesn't require you to stop, he said. It requires you to make it possible for others to do it the way you do. She looked at the table. She looked at Bello, who was looking at nothing. She looked at Walter Crane, who had arrived in her ward without a name, and was now sitting at the head of a table, offering her the chance to change the institution that had been trying to get rid of her. She thought about every patient she had fought for, every chart she had read twice, every discharge she had refused, every night shift she had driven home from wondering if it was worth it. All right, she said, but I keep my nights. He looked at her. You keep your nights, he agreed. Dr. Bello resigned 4 weeks after the board meeting. Not because he was fired. Because the board, with Walter Crane returned to active involvement, restructured the performance evaluation criteria for department heads to include patient outcome data, staff retention rates, and a new metric that Bello had lobbied against for 3 years, patient dignity assessments completed by nursing staff. Bello looked at the new criteria and understood, with the clarity that arrives when the architecture changes around you, that he was not going to perform well under them. He resigned on a Friday. He took his file on Miriam with him. It no longer belonged to anyone who wanted it. 3 other senior administrators left in the following 6 months. Not dramatically, not in the way of people who have been exposed and are fleeing. In the quieter way of people who had built careers inside a particular version of an institution and recognized that the version had changed. The institution had not changed overnight. It did not change overnight. Institutions never do. What changed overnight was who was steering it, and in which direction and why. Walter Crane returned to full board involvement for the first time in 11 years. He did not explain publicly where he had been or what the years had contained. He was a private man and remained one. What he did in the 18 months that followed the board meeting was attend every departmental review, read every patient outcome report, and ask in every meeting the same question. And how was this patient treated? Not what was their outcome, not what was the cost, not what was the throughput time. How were they treated? The staff learned to have a real answer ready. It changed things. Slowly, imperfectly, the way real things change. But genuinely. She kept her nights. 2 nights a week, she worked the emergency department the same way she had always worked it, looking at the patient before the chart, staying the extra minutes, asking the questions that the protocol did not require, but the person in the bed needed someone to ask. The other nights she spent in her new role, building the standards, reviewing the protocols, sitting with nursing staff across every department and asking them what they needed to do their jobs the way they had trained to do them and had been slowly prevented from doing. The answers were not surprising. They were the answers of people who had been asked, possibly for the first time, what they thought. Time, respect, the assurance that thoroughness would not be punished. The space to be nurses. Walter stopped by the emergency department one night in December. Late. The department was quiet, the particular quiet of a Tuesday at 2 a.m. when the city has exhaled and not yet breathed back in. Miriam was at the nurse's station, charting. She looked up when he came in. "You're here late," she said. "I wanted to see it," he said. "The night shift, the way it actually runs." She showed him, not a tour, not a presentation, just the shift as it happened. A man with a cut hand. An elderly woman with breathing difficulties. A teenager who had taken something she shouldn't have and arrived frightened and was met without judgment. He watched Miriam work. He watched the way she moved through the department, efficient and unhurried, both at once, the particular quality of a person who has made peace with what their work is and does it fully. At the end of the shift, near 4 a.m., they stood in the corridor outside the staff room with cups of bad hospital coffee. "Why did you become a nurse?" he asked. She thought about it. "I was sick when I was 12, she said. "Nothing serious in the end. But I was in hospital for 2 weeks and I was alone a lot of the time and frightened, and one nurse, used to come and sit with me on her break. She didn't do anything special. She just sat, and it made an enormous difference to being 12 years old and frightened in a hospital bed." She looked at her coffee. "I decided I wanted to be that, the person who sits, even when sitting is not in the protocol." Walter was quiet for a moment. "And why did you build the hospital?" she asked. He looked at the corridor, at the pale green walls and the fluorescent lights and the trolley parked near the double doors. "My wife," he said. "She was sick for a long time. Near the end, in a different hospital, she was treated as though her comfort was an inconvenience. As though the difficulty of what she was going through was a logistical problem rather than a person going through something." He stopped. "I had money. I used it to build a place where that would not happen, and then I lost track of whether it still did." He looked at Miriam. "You reminded me." They stood in the corridor in the forum quiet and finished their coffee. Down the hall, a patient's light came on. Miriam set her cup down. She went. That was the job. It had always been the job. And now, for the first time in years, the institution around her was beginning to remember it too. Mercy General Hospital received its highest patient satisfaction scores in 14 years in the year following Walter Crane's return. The emergency department, specifically, was cited in a regional healthcare review as a model for what the publication called humane efficiency. The ability to move patients through a system without treating the movement as more important than the people being moved. Miriam framed the review and put it in the staff room, not for herself, for the nurses who had worked the way she worked and been told, for years, that their way was wrong. Walter Crane never publicly identified himself as the man who had been brought in from the cold on a Tuesday night in February. He did not need the story to be told that way. The people who needed to know knew. The people who didn't. He kept the resource card Miriam had given him on the day of his discharge. It was in his wallet on the night of the board meeting. It was in his wallet after that. She found out about this a year later, by accident, when he pulled out his wallet to show her something and the card was there, worn at the fold from being carried. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You kept it," she said. "In case," he said. "You told me I didn't have to use it." She laughed. For the first time in a long time, in a corridor of the hospital she had almost been fired from, she laughed. On the wall of the emergency department, beside the nurses' station, where Miriam had charted on the night Walter Crane was brought in without a name, there is a small framed line. Walter had it installed without announcement. Most of the staff walked past it for a week before anyone read it. It reads, "Look at the patient first." No attribution, no explanation, just the instruction framed at eye level where every nurse begins their shift. Miriam walks past it every night she works. She does not need to read it. She has always known it. But she is glad it is there for the ones who are still learning. Before you go, I want to be honest with you about this story. It is, on its surface, a satisfying story. A good person is recognized. A bad system is corrected. The nurse keeps her nights and gets the title, and the man who built the hospital comes back to fix it. There is justice. There is resolution. And I am not going to pretend that is not satisfying. It is. We need stories where goodness is seen and rewarded. We are starved of them. But I want to say the harder thing underneath it. Miriam should not have needed Walter Crane to save her job. Her work was good before he arrived. Her instincts were right before he arrived. The patients she fought for were alive because of decisions she made before anyone with power was paying attention. The system that was trying to fire her was wrong before he arrived. It did not become wrong when the billionaire walked into the board meeting. It was wrong on the day it built a file on a nurse for spending 40 minutes with a patient who needed 40 minutes. What Walter Crane gave Miriam was not vindication. Her work had already vindicated itself. What he gave her was power. The institutional authority to do what she had already been doing, but now without having to fight the institution to do it. That is not a small thing. Power matters. Resources matter. Who sits at the head of the table matters enormously. But the rarest thing in this story is not the billionaire founder who came back. The rarest thing is the nurse who kept working the right way when no one important was watching. Who treated an unidentified man in a gray coat the same way she treated everyone else. Who handed him a resource card at discharge and did not think about it again. Who drove home from her shift and came back the next night and did it all again. The Walters of the world are rare. The Miriams are rarer. And the question this story is really asking, the question underneath the satisfying ending, is this. What happens to the Miriams that nobody important is watching? How many files are being built, right now, on people who are doing the right thing in systems that have decided the right thing is inconvenient? How many nurses, teachers, social workers, carers, people in the business of other people, are being quietly removed from the rooms where they are most needed because their thoroughness doesn't fit the spreadsheet? Not all of them will have in Walter Crane. Most of them won't. And they will keep doing the right thing anyway, because that is who they are, because they became what they became to do it right, and they cannot do it any other way. Look at the patient first. It is the simplest instruction. It is the hardest one to protect inside a system that has confused efficiency with care. Miriam protected it for 9 years with no one watching. That is the story. The rest is just what happened when someone finally saw. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who works in care. A nurse, a teacher, a social worker, anyone who does the invisible work of showing up for other people and is rarely thanked for it. And drop your thoughts in the comments, because I need to ask you. Have you ever been a Miriam, doing the right thing in a system that was punishing you for it? Or have you ever been the patient who needed someone to look at you first? Tell me. I'll be reading everyone. See you in the next story.